The silverware clinked against Constance Prescott's heirloom china, and I counted the seats again. 8 adults around that table. I cooked 3 of the dishes, drove them over in foil pans that morning before my shift, and Constance set them out on her sideboard without a word. The sweet potato casserole, the green bean situation with the crispy onions on top, and the cornbread that Constance told her sister-in-law she'd been experimenting with all week. She had not touched a pot. I made it at 6 that morning before 12 hours in the ER, and I could still smell the cast iron on my fingers under the hand soap. The dining room had that heavy Savannah humidity even with the air conditioning running full blast, and it smelled like roast pork and the floral perfume Constance sprayed before company arrived. She bought it from a department store in Charleston and applied it the way she applied everything, generously, with the assumption that everyone wanted more of her. The scent was thick enough to leave a film on the back of my tongue. The chandelier cast yellow light on faces I'd been studying for 7 years. Wade's Aunt Patricia dabbing her lips with a cloth napkin between bites. 2 cousins and their wives leaning into separate conversations, comfortable, settled, all of them Prescotts by blood or by choice. And me, Megan Lawson, still a Lawson on my nursing license, sitting at the far end of the table in the seat next to the kitchen door. I had sat in this seat every Sunday for 7 years. I mentioned it to Wade once early on something light, something that was supposed to be a joke. "I'm starting to think this is the kids' table," I said. He didn't laugh. He said his mother liked being near the head, and there were only so many chairs, and I was closest to the kitchen anyway, so it made sense. I stopped bringing it up. I stopped bringing up a lot of things. Constance held court the way she always did, leaning back in her chair with her thin gold watch catching the candlelight and her silver bob, not moving not one hair, because she had it set at the salon every Thursday morning. $55 every week paid from an account Wade funded. The auto-pay notification showed up on our banking app every Thursday, tucked between the electric bill and the car insurance for a Lexus I had never ridden in. She was telling a story about redecorating her living room, the new drapes, the cost of good linen, the contractor who really understood her vision. Wade's aunt nodded along. The cousins' wives made appreciative sounds. Everyone listened to Constance. That was the first rule of the Prescott family, and I learned it before I learned the recipe for her pecan pie. You listened? You agreed? You did not ask who was paying for the drapes? Then the conversation turned to me the way a searchlight sweeps a yard. "Megan, honey, you work so much." Constance's voice carried the exact pitch of concern that meant the opposite. It was the same voice she used when she told me my haircut was brave, and when she mentioned that her neighbor's daughter-in-law had such a lovely garden, but of course she has the time. Every word a small, clean incision. "I picked up extra shifts this month," I said. "The ER's been short-staffed since July." Well, she set down her fork, looked at Wade, then back at me with a smile that had been refined over 61 years of telling people exactly what she thought of them while maintaining plausible deniability. "I suppose someone has to keep the lights on." The cousins laughed. Wade's Aunt Patricia smiled into her wine glass. Then Constance turned to her sister-in-law and said loud enough for every person at that table to hear, loud enough that she meant for me to hear, which was the whole point. "Between you and me, she's more like the maid than the Mrs." Wade laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an uncomfortable chuckle you make when someone says something awkward and you're trying to smooth it over. A full, easy laugh, the kind that comes from the chest without passing through the brain first. Like his mother had told a genuinely good joke. The table kept eating. Someone asked about the Braves bullpen situation. A fork scraped against china. The air conditioning hummed from the vent directly above my seat, the same vent that had been blowing cold air on the back of my neck every Sunday for 7 years because I sat beneath it and never asked to move. I looked at Wade. He was buttering a roll with his good hand, his wedding ring catching the light. He did not look up at me, did not check, did not flinch, did not do anything at all because doing nothing was what Wade did best and had done for the entirety of our marriage. 7 years of Sunday dinners, 7 years of sitting by the kitchen door, 7 years of cooking the food and cleaning the plates and writing the checks and driving home in silence while Wade listened to sports radio and I listened to the absence of an apology that was never going to come. Something in my chest shifted. Not broke. Shifted. Like a bone that had been set wrong for years and suddenly, between one breath and the next, snapped back to where it was always supposed to be. I put my fork down. The thin silver chain around my neck, the one I bought with my first nursing paycheck at 22, the only piece of jewelry I owned that no one gave me and no one could take, caught the light from that chandelier. I picked up my purse, pushed back my chair, and walked to the front door. Behind me, I heard Constance's voice pitched perfectly for an audience. Oh, for heaven's sake! She's so sensitive. Wade did not follow. The drive home took 11 minutes. I counted every one, watching the live oaks pass through the windshield with their Spanish moss hanging like something left behind. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Wade was still at his mother's, probably on a second helping of the cornbread I made at 6 that morning. I packed a bag in the bedroom with the overhead light off, working by the glow from the bathroom. Scrubs for Monday. Toiletries. Phone charger. The cardboard tube from the top shelf of the closet that held my nursing school diploma, the one I never framed because Wade said we'd get to it, and we never did. The bedroom smelled like his drugstore cologne, the kind in the blue bottle that cost $9, and smelled like every waiting room I'd ever sat in. The sheets were ones I picked out. The nightstand held a framed photo from our wedding, a posed shot outside the church. In the photo, I was smiling at the camera. Wade was turned slightly, looking at his mother in the front row. I'd noticed this detail 3 years into the marriage. I never mentioned it. Mentioning things in this house was like dropping stones into a well. You heard the splash, but nothing came back up. On the kitchen counter, I spotted an envelope. A mortgage company, but not our mortgage company. Different name, different logo, crisp white envelope. 3 months ago, the first one arrived, and I asked Wade about it. Junk mail, he said, barely looking up from his phone. He tossed it in the recycling bin. Another one had come. I picked it up, turned it over, shoved it into my bag without opening it. From the driveway engine running, I called Jill. Jill. I left. A pause. The sound of a television muting in the background, then, her voice fully awake despite the hour. Left, or left and going back tomorrow, left. Come to my place, right now. You remember the code for the gate, I remember. Good, come, do not stop. We'll figure this out. Jill Brennan's apartment was on the second floor of a walk-up near Forsyth Park, the kind of place with creaky stairs and a refrigerator that hummed loud enough to hold a conversation with. She opened the door before I knocked, wearing a Savannah State sweatshirt and the expression of a woman who had been waiting for this phone call for years. She handed me a glass of water and sat across from me on the couch, legs tucked under her the same way she used to sit in our dorm room when one of us had something heavy to carry. I told her what Constance said, what Wade did. What Wade did not do. She called you the maid. Jill's jaw tightened. The glass in her hand tilted slightly, in front of everyone. And Wade laughed. The words came out flat, stripped of feeling like reading someone else's diagnosis. Saying them out loud was strange. It was like translating something from a language I was only beginning to understand, and the translation was worse than the original. He laughed like it was funny, Jill. Megan. Jill set her glass on the coffee table with a careful click. You've been paying their bills for years. His car note, his mother's credit cards, the property taxes on Constance's house. You told me this 2 Christmases ago when you had that 3rd glass of wine and I pretended not to notice you were crying. That's what family does. That's what a mark does. Jill's voice was quiet, careful, but underneath it ran something hard. There's a difference. I opened my mouth to argue because arguing was the reflex, because defending the Prescott family was a muscle I'd been exercising for 7 years until it was the strongest thing about me. But nothing came. The words caught somewhere between my chest and my throat and stayed there. Jill leaned forward. You keep buying a seat at a table where they make you eat in the kitchen. That sentence sat between us like a key on a table, waiting for someone to pick it up. We talked for another hour. I told her about the savings account. The one I opened my first year of nursing, before the marriage, before Wade, before any of it. A habit from foster care. 3 placements before I turned 12, and the last family, the Donaldsons, kept me for 4 years. Let me pick a bedroom. Let me put my name on the mailbox. Then they had a baby of their own, a girl, and within 6 months I was standing in a hallway with a trash bag of clothes, while a social worker explained that the placement didn't work out. The Donaldsons' daughter waved goodbye from the window. She was 3 months old, and she'd already replaced me. So I kept a savings account. Emergency money. A habit from a childhood where the emergency was always the same one, becoming unnecessary. I hadn't touched it in 7 years. $22,000. My exit strategy that I told myself I would never need. I did not sleep that night. I lay on Jill's couch with a quilt that smelled like fabric softener and stared at the ceiling while the refrigerator hummed. I ran the math. My salary as an ER nurse, $68,000 a year before taxes. Wade's salary as an insurance adjuster, $42,000. Our joint checking account, the transfers I saw but never questioned, because questioning meant being difficult, and being difficult in the Prescott family meant cold shoulders and canceled plans. And Constance telling Wade that some people just aren't cut out for family life. The numbers never added up. My paychecks went in, and the money went out, and I never sat down and traced where it went, because tracing it would have meant admitting that the family I married into was not a family at all. It was a billing arrangement with Sunday dinners. Wade called Sunday morning. I let it ring 3 times, listening to the buzz against Jill's coffee table before I picked up. "Mama feels bad," he said. His voice carried the carefully rehearsed tone of a man delivering a script someone else wrote. "Just come home and we'll forget about it." I held the phone against my ear and listened to the silence underneath his words. He was not asking if I was okay. He was not apologizing. He was asking me to come back and be quiet, the way you ask a dog to stop barking. "I'm going to need some time, Wade." His voice shifted. Not to concern, to annoyance, the sound a jar lid makes when you tighten it past the threading. "You're making this into a bigger deal than it is, Meg. You know Mama. She didn't mean anything by it." Jill stood in the kitchen doorway with 2 coffees and the expression of someone holding back a scream. She mouthed slowly and clearly, "Hang up." I hung up. Jill sat across from me and slid a business card across the table. Navy blue embossed lettering. An attorney at her firm who specialized in marital asset disputes. I stared at the name. My thumb traced the edge of the card. I didn't call that day. I called Monday at 7 in the morning, standing in the hospital parking lot in my scrubs, with the sun coming up over the emergency department entrance. The receptionist asked if it was urgent. I said yes. She put me through. By October, the pieces were coming together in ways I had not expected. The attorney's office was on the 3rd floor of a building downtown, the kind with crown molding and leather chairs and framed certificates on every wall. Jill came with me. She sat in the corner with a legal pad, though I think she was really there because she was afraid I'd lose my nerve in the elevator. The attorney was a woman named Reynolds, mid-50s, reading glasses on a chain, a voice that sounded like she'd heard 1,000 stories like mine, and was still furious about every single one. I described the pattern. My paychecks deposited into the joint checking account every 2 weeks like clockwork. Large transfers out authorized by Wade, routed to accounts and obligations that had nothing to do with our household. His mother's car payment on a Lexus I never sat in. Property taxes on Constance's house across town. Credit card payments on accounts I never opened, never signed for, never agreed to. Over 5 years, the attorney estimated at least $185,000 of the money I earned, working 12-hour shifts on my feet, had been redirected to the Prescott family. Reynolds explained something that rearranged the inside of my skull. Georgia allows fault-based divorce on grounds of cruel treatment, and there was a legal concept called dissipation of marital assets. Every dollar Wade funneled to his mother without my meaningful consent could be deducted from his share of whatever we split. The court could look at the transfers, evaluate whether I truly agreed to them, or simply did not object, because objecting was never an option, and assign the loss entirely to Wade's column. "You have a case," Reynolds said, removing her glasses. "A strong one." I signed the retainer agreement, funded by the emergency savings account I'd kept since I was 22. The account a foster kid opens because she learned early that safety is something you build yourself with your own money, hidden where nobody can take it. Walking to my car, my hands shook. Not from fear. From the disorienting vertigo of doing something for myself instead of for someone who would never say thank you. Reynolds recommended a forensic accountant to trace the full financial picture. Jill knew one through the firm. The investigation began. I worked my shifts at the hospital. 12 hours on my feet, starting IVs and reading vitals and holding the hand of an elderly man in bed 6 who called me sweetheart and meant it without a single condition attached. Then I drove to the hotel room I'd rented by the week, a place off Abercorn Street, with thin walls and a parking lot that smelled like hot asphalt. I spread bank statements across the bed and opened my laptop. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and stale coffee grounds. Outside the window, October's last warmth pressed against the glass, the air heavy with moisture, and the faint sweetness of rotting magnolia leaves from the trees that lined every street in Savannah, like witnesses who'd seen everything and said nothing. I was learning to read my own life in numbers. Jill called every evening after work. We went through statements together, line by line, month by month, year by year. The pattern was so consistent, it looked designed because it was. 3,700 in March 2022. Jill's voice was flat on the phone, the flatness of someone controlling their anger so it wouldn't break through the receiver and scare me. "That's the month they told you they couldn't afford to come to your birthday dinner." I closed my eyes. "What about April 4,200? Looks like a payment to a contractor, a renovation company out of Pooler. Her kitchen." I pressed my fingers against my temples. Constance redid the countertops. "Marble." She showed them off at Easter. "Made Wade carry in the ham so everyone would walk through the kitchen." "Megan," Jill's voice cracked just slightly, "you were working double shifts that month. You told me your feet were so swollen you couldn't get your shoes on." Then Jill said something I didn't catch because she turned away from the phone, and when she came back her voice was different, steadier, professional. "Okay, keep going. What about May? The numbers built into something I could not look away from. Car insurance for Constance's Lexus. Property taxes on Constance's house. Monthly credit card payments on accounts with Constance's name." And then tucked into a Thanksgiving memory like a splinter, I recalled Constance bragging about her little boutique venture. A clothing shop. An LLC she filed in her own name. She talked about it like a charming hobby, something a woman of her standing did to fill the afternoons between hair appointments. Nobody at the table asked where the money came from. Nobody asked Constance uncomfortable questions. That was the second rule of the Prescott family. The forensic accountant's preliminary report arrived on a Tuesday night. I opened it on my laptop, still in my scrubs, sitting cross-legged on the hotel bed with a cold cup of coffee sweating onto the nightstand. Total estimated dissipation, $185,000 over 5 years. I read the number 3 times, closed the laptop, opened it, read it again. $185,000, more than 2 full years of my take-home pay. That was every holiday I missed because I picked up the shift. Every time I came home with my feet aching and my back tight and my hands smelling like latex, and Wade asked what was for dinner without looking up from his phone. Every Sunday at that table, in that seat by the kitchen door, watching Constance credit herself for the casserole I made. They ate well on my dime, and they laughed while they did it. My attorney filed the fault divorce petition the following week. Grounds cruel treatment. We requested temporary orders, exclusive use of the marital home, and a freeze on all joint accounts. The Chatham County Courthouse smelled like floor wax and the stale coffee from a vending machine near the elevator bank. I sat on a wooden bench in the second-floor hallway wearing a navy blouse I ironed that morning at the hotel, using the miniature ironing board from the closet. My hands were steady. My stomach was not. Wade sat at the opposite end of the same hallway with his attorney, a man in a gray suit who kept checking his phone. Wade wore khakis and a polo shirt, the uniform of a man who had never been asked to account for anything. His left knee bounced. He did not look at me. This was the first time I had seen him since the night I walked out of his mother's dining room 5 weeks ago, leaving behind a plate of food I cooked and a seat I was never given. The hearing was brief. My attorney presented the preliminary forensic findings, the spreadsheet of transfers, the account statements, the 5-year pattern of money flowing out of the joint account and into Constance Prescott's orbit. Wade's attorney argued the transfers were family obligations, customary consensual, the normal give and take of an extended family unit. The judge was a man in his 60s who reviewed the documents over his reading glasses without expression. He granted temporary orders. I received exclusive use of the marital home. Joint accounts were frozen. Wade was ordered to vacate within 48 hours. Outside the courtroom in the hallway, with the floor wax smell and the fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill, Wade caught my arm. His grip was firm, familiar, the same grip he used when he wanted me to lower my voice at Constance's dinner table. "You're really doing this." His voice was low, not angry yet, confused the way a person gets confused when the furniture rearranges itself in a room they thought they owned. "You laughed, Wade. It was a joke." Mama was joking. $185,000 is not a joke. His face changed. The confusion folded into something harder, something that looked like the first draft of fear wearing the mask of anger. He dropped my arm. "You went through our finances, my finances," I said. "I earned that money." He stared at me for a long beat. The hallway was empty, except for a clerk carrying a stack of files and not looking at us. Then Wade turned and walked away with his attorney, his shoulders rigid under the wrinkled polo, the wedding ring catching the fluorescent light as his hand swung at his side. I walked to my car in the parking garage, sat behind the wheel, and waited for something that did not arrive. Relief, triumph, some feeling that matched the magnitude of what just happened. The house was mine. The accounts were frozen. The judge had listened and ruled, and Wade had looked for the first time in 7 years genuinely scared. And all I could hear sitting in the driver's seat with the engine idling and the parking garage concrete around me was Constance's voice. More like the maid than the missus. And Wade's laugh, easy and warm, like it cost him nothing, because it did. Winning a hearing did not change what they thought of me. Maybe nothing ever would. I drove to the marital home. Walked through the front door alone. The house was quiet in a way that was not peaceful but observational, like the walls were watching to see what I would do next. I stood in the kitchen where I cooked 1,000 dinners for people who never set me a place, and I pressed my palms flat against the counter and breathed. The counterattack came the following week, and it arrived from exactly where I should have expected. Constance worked the phones with the efficiency of a general planning a campaign. She called every member of the extended family, Wade's Aunt Patricia, the cousins, the uncle with the lake house. The narrative she constructed was precise, consistent, and devastating in its simplicity. Megan was having a breakdown. She was unstable. She was trying to steal from the family. Wade gave that girl everything, pulled her out of nothing, and this was how she repaid his generosity. Wade's attorney filed a formal response. The transfers were consensual household decisions. Megan benefited from the family relationship. They attached text messages from 5 years of marriage messages where I replied, "Okay and sure and whatever you think." Out of context, stripped from the years of silence and compliance that produced them, they looked like agreement. They looked like a wife who signed off on every dollar. In truth, they were the vocabulary of a woman who had been trained methodically and completely to say yes, because saying anything else meant exile. Then Constance escalated. She showed up at the hospital during shift change, 3:15 in the afternoon, the parking lot full of nurses coming and going, the perfect audience. She wore linen and lipstick and the thin gold watch, standing beside her Lexus like she was waiting for a valet. "You ungrateful little nothing," Constance's voice was steady, almost pleasant, carrying the sweet tea lethality of a woman who had been winning arguments in Savannah for 6 decades. My son pulled you out of nowhere. You had nothing before him. Nothing. And now you want to take his money. It was my money, Constance. My voice came out quieter than I intended. My scrubs still had a coffee stain from the morning that I hadn't had time to change, and I was suddenly painfully aware of how I must have looked to her. Tired, rumpled, common. You will lose. She stepped closer. Her perfume was the same one from the dining room, thick, floral, suffocating. You will lose everything. And when you do, don't you dare come crawling back to this family. I did not respond. I turned and walked through the automatic doors, past the front desk, past the waiting room, where a mother held a sleeping child, to the nurse's station, where the shift report was waiting. I clocked in. My hands shook while I logged into the system, and I pressed them flat against the counter until they stopped. Her words landed exactly where they were designed to land. Nowhere. Nothing. The foster kid standing in a hallway with a trash bag of clothes. She knew where to aim because Wade told her the story years ago, back when sharing my past still seemed like a way to build trust. Constance filed it away, the way she filed everything, as ammunition. I texted Jill from the break room. Constance came to the hospital. Seen in the parking lot. Coworkers saw. Jill responded in 12 seconds. Document everything. Date, time, witnesses, names if you can get them. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark. The house was not empty of furniture. It was empty of whatever makes a place feel inhabited, whatever accumulates between walls when the people inside them are actually building something together, rather than merely occupying the same address. The living room couch where Wade watched football while I worked Saturdays. The kitchen table where I ate alone most nights because Wade was at his mother's. The bedroom where I slept on the left side because Wade said the right was his. The refrigerator hummed. The air conditioning clicked on, then off. I sat there with a glass of water and listened to the November night settle over a house that had never been mine in any way that mattered. Wade's lawyer had filed a motion to dismiss the dissipation claim. He argued the transfers were gifts I agreed to. He presented the text messages as evidence of consent. And there was a part of me, the part that had been saying okay and sure and whatever you think for 7 years, that wondered if he was right. If saying yes to something you were afraid to refuse was the same as choosing it, Jill called. Her voice was careful, modulated the voice of someone trying not to scare a person who was standing too close to a drop-off. The judge hasn't ruled on the motion yet, but Megan, his lawyer, is good. They're going to argue you knew about every single transfer. I did know. I pressed my palm against the table, against the wood grain I had wiped down 1,000 times. I just didn't think I was allowed to say no. Jill was quiet for a long time, long enough that I heard the ice maker in her kitchen rattle through the phone. Then, "That's not how a court sees it, Megan." I hung up. The house settled around me, creaking the way old houses do in the cooling air. On the mantel, the wedding photo. I was smiling. Wade was looking at his mother. The truth I had been running from sat down across from me at that table, patient and uninvited and immovable. I did not miss Wade. The space where missing him should have been was quiet still, like a room that had been empty for years and nobody noticed because the door was always closed. I did not want Constance's approval. The craving for it had burned itself out somewhere between the dinner table and this kitchen table, consumed by a fire I didn't even know was lit. I did not even want the money, not really. The money was never about the money. It was about what the numbers represented. Proof that I mattered. Proof that 7 years of my life had not been a transaction where I was the only one paying. Evidence tangible and notarized that I was more than what Constance said I was. But here was the thing I could not outrun. Sitting in the dark in a house I won from a man who laughed at me in public. Even if the judge ruled in my favor, even if every dollar came back to my column on a spreadsheet, I would still be the girl standing in a hallway at 9 years old with a trash bag of clothes and a social worker who couldn't meet her eyes. I would still be looking for someone to tell me I was enough. No court could give me that. No verdict. No dollar amount. No judge in Chatham County or anywhere else could sign an order that would make me stop waiting for permission to belong to myself. I had to stop looking for my worth in other people's ledgers. The clock in the kitchen ticked. The ice maker rattled. Outside, a car passed on the street, its headlights sweeping across the wall and then gone. I stood up, walked to the bathroom, turned on the light and looked at myself in the mirror. The dark circles under my eyes, the rough hands from hospital soap and 12-hour shifts, the thin silver chain around my neck, the one I bought with my first paycheck. The one thing in this house that belonged to me before any of this. I was still here. That had to count for something. That had to be enough. Because it was all I had ever really had. The next morning, I called Jill before sunrise. My voice sounded different. I could hear it myself, and I could hear that Jill heard it too because she stopped chewing whatever she was eating and listened. "I need you to pull the records on Constance's Boutique, LLC, I said. The one she bragged about at Thanksgiving. Why, because Wade paid for it. And I want to know with whose money." Jill paused. "Then I'll call the forensic accountant today." After I hung up, I pulled the mortgage envelope from my bag. The one from the company I didn't recognize. The one Wade called junk mail. I opened it for the first time, scanned the letterhead, and cross-referenced the company name against the accounts the forensic accountant had flagged in the preliminary report. The name matched. I photographed every page of the document and texted the images to Jill. The forensic accountant's final report arrived the following week. It sat on Reynolds's desk between us like something that could detonate. Wade had co-signed a second mortgage on our marital home, $120,000. The funds were wired directly to an LLC, registered in Constance Prescott's name. The boutique, the clothing shop she bragged about at Thanksgiving like it was a charming afternoon hobby. The LLC never turned a profit. It never opened a storefront. It never sold a single blouse. The entity was dissolved 8 months ago. The money was gone. Wade signed that mortgage without telling me. In Georgia, both spouses must consent to encumber the marital home. He did not ask. He did not tell. He leveraged a house I paid for to fund his mother's vanity project, and he signed documents that required my signature without it. This was not just dissipation. This was fraud. Total exposure, $185,000 in redirected income plus $120,000 in secret mortgage debt. $305,000. Reynolds filed an amended petition, added the second mortgage, requested Wade Prescott's deposition under oath. $305,000. The number rearranged itself in my head during my shifts while I hung IV bags and monitored blood pressure, and spoke in the soft, steady voice that ER nurses learn to use when everything around them is falling apart. Vacations I never took. A house I could have owned free and clear. The retirement account I stopped contributing to because Wade said we need the cash flow. Cash that flowed to his mother's marble countertops and phantom boutique. They bled me dry while telling me I was lucky to be at the table. I was never at the table. I was under it. The deposition was held in a conference room at Reynolds's office, and it was the quietest, loud thing I have ever witnessed. Fluorescent lights overhead, the kind that hum just below the frequency of hearing, a long conference table with a fake wood grain, a court reporter in the corner, fingers poised over her machine. Water glasses set out in a neat row that nobody touched. The air conditioning was cranked too high, and I kept my hands folded in my lap so no one would see they were cold. Wade sat across from me. He looked like a man who had been sleeping badly and eating worse. The polo shirt was wrinkled, the khakis creased in the wrong places. He wore his wedding ring, still turning it on his finger the way he always did when something made him nervous. He did not make eye contact, Reynolds began. Her voice was measured clinical, each question laid out with the precision of a surgeon marking incision points before the first cut. "Mr. Prescott, did you authorize monthly transfers from the joint checking account to your mother, Constance Prescott, between 2020 and 2025? Wade glanced at his lawyer, who gave a small, practiced nod. Some of them, Wade said, they were family expenses. Family expenses totaling $185,000 over 5 years. I don't know the exact number. Did your wife, Megan Lawson, authorize these transfers? A pause. Wade's ring caught the fluorescent light as he turned it. Around and around. She knew about them. Knowing and authorizing are different things, Mr. Prescott. Reynolds removed her glasses. Did she sign any authorization form, any joint directive, any written agreement consenting to these transfers? His lawyer whispered something. Wade swallowed. The room was so quiet, I could hear the court reporter breathing. No. Reynolds let the words sit in the air. The court reporter's keys clicked softly. Then she opened a folder. Mr. Prescott, did you co-sign a second mortgage on the marital home at 4412 Habersham Street for $120,000? Wade's face went white. Not pale, white. The color of paper, the color of something drained of everything that gives it life. Without your wife's knowledge or consent, his lawyer objected. Cited scope. Cited relevance. Reynolds responded with the amended petition number. The objection was noted. Wade looked at his hands. At the ring, he kept turning. Then he said, in a voice I had never heard from him before, a voice stripped of the smooth confidence and the easy dismissals and the "you're overreacting" cadence that had been the soundtrack of my marriage. My mother needed help. 4 words. That was the whole marriage distilled into 4 words. His mother needed help, and I was the help. I was the paycheck, and the Sunday cook, and the woman who sat by the kitchen door, and the account that funded the car and the house and the boutique and the marble countertops. I was never the wife. I was the funding source. I looked at Wade across that table. He was staring at his hands. The man who proposed to me on a Tuesday evening in a hospital parking lot, who got down on one knee next to my 12-year-old Honda and said, "You'll never have to be alone again." He was right about one thing in the end. I was not alone anymore. I had myself. And sitting in that conference room watching him unravel under the weight of his own choices that turned out to be enough, the deposition ended. Wade stood up, without looking at me. His lawyer guided him out with a hand on his back, the kind of firm steering grip you use on someone who might walk into a wall if you let go. Jill was waiting in the hallway. She did not ask how it went. She handed me a coffee, the good kind from the shop on Bull Street, and we walked to the parking lot in a silence that for the first time in months was comfortable. The judge ruled in the first week of December. Dissipation, $185,000 deducted from Wade Prescott's share of the marital estate. The court found the transfers were made without meaningful consent and constituted dissipation of marital assets under Georgia law. Second mortgage liability assigned entirely to Wade. The court found he had encumbered the marital home without the knowledge or consent of the co-owner in violation of Georgia homestead protections. The remaining balance was his sole responsibility. Equitable distribution. I received the home equity, my retirement contributions, and the dissipation credit. Wade received his personal property, his diminished retirement, and the debt his mother's boutique created. The marriage was dissolved. Fault, cruel treatment sustained. Wade left the courtroom without looking at me. Constance was not present. She was not required to attend, and she chose not to. She did not need to be there. The numbers told her story line by line, transfer by transfer. Every payment traced back to a woman who called me the maid while eating on my dime. I signed the final papers at a small table outside the courtroom. The clerk handed me my copies. I walked through the courthouse doors and into the December air-cool for Savannah, the live oaks on the boulevard, still holding their leaves, the Spanish moss hanging like something patient, like something that had been waiting. I did not celebrate. That evening I stood in my kitchen. I had moved the table, pulled it away from the wall, where it spent 7 years pushed against the baseboard, shoved aside, out of the way. I centered it in the room under the light fixture where a table belongs. I cooked dinner. For one. Grilled chicken and rice, nothing complicated, nothing that would impress anyone, which was the point. Constance once told Wade's aunt that my cooking was simple, and she said it the way she said everything, with a smile that dared you to object. My cooking was simple. It was also mine. I set a single plate, a single glass of water, a cloth napkin because tonight was worth a cloth napkin. The thin silver chain caught the kitchen light, the same chain that caught the chandelier at Constance's dining table the night I walked out. I sat down. At my table, not pushed against the wall, not next to the kitchen door. In the center of the room, the chicken was good, the rice was good, the house was quiet, and the quiet belonged to me. Jill called around 8. "Come over. I'll open a bottle of wine. We should celebrate. Maybe tomorrow," I said. Tonight I'm sitting with the quiet. She understood. Jill always understood the things I didn't say, which was why she'd been my friend for 12 years and the Prescotts hadn't lasted 7. My phone buzzed once, a text from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it. Wade's cousin. The one who sat across from me at that dinner table every Sunday. The one who laughed when Constance laughed, who smiled into her wine glass, who never once looked me in the eye while I cleared her plate. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything that night. You deserved better." All of us knew. I read it twice. Set the phone face down on the table. Finished my rice. Tomorrow I would go back to the hospital. 12-hour shifts, the familiar rhythm of vitals and IVs, and the quiet courage of patients who trusted me with their worst moments. My feet would ache by hour 8. My back would tighten by hour 10. I would drive home to this house, this kitchen, this table. I would pay the mortgage. My mortgage. My name on the deed. I would start contributing to my retirement account again, the one I stopped funding because Wade said we needed the cash flow, the cash that flowed to his mother's marble countertops and a boutique that never sold a single thing. The girl who stood in a hallway at 9 years old with a trash bag grew up. She put herself through nursing school, sat in the parking lot with a diploma and no one to show it to, and framed the picture herself. She married a man who said she'd never be alone. She sat at his mother's table for 7 years by the kitchen door under the cold vent, and she cooked, and she cleaned, and she paid, and she smiled, and then she stopped. Not a revenge story, not a victory lap, just a woman who stopped trading her dignity for a seat she was never given. I washed my plate, put it in the drying rack, turned off the kitchen light. The silver chain glinted once in the dark hallway as I walked to the bedroom. The house settled around me the way houses do when they finally belong to someone who belongs to herself. Somewhere in Savannah, the Prescotts were recalculating. I was not thinking about them.